First Baptist. We started as a congregation about the year of our Lord 1776. I, of course, had already been ordained previous to the 1776 congregation in 1772, when I was ordained by some preachers coming from places like Rhode Island and Connecticut and New York that had entered into Virginia about 1750. And of course, by the time they would find their way to Williamsburg, I was greatly enthralled with their means of preaching the Word of God. These were Baptists, of course, and many of them, of course, refused to get the proper license to preach. That's what you have to do if you were a dissenter, dissenting from the only church, of course, in 10 of the 13 colonies, and of course that would be the Church of England. If you were of any other denomination, you would have to get at least a license from the local courthouse, signed and sealed by that judge of that courthouse, and that would only give you permission to preach. And so therefore, many of the other denominations, like the Presbyterians and the Methodists and Quakers and Dunkers and Lutherans and Amish and Mennonite, they would also have to obtain licenses to meet with their flocks or congregation. And of course, in the years of our Lord before 1776, you could not call your congregation a church. There would be only one church, and as I said, the King's Church, the Church of England. But I grew up here in Williamsburg, and as a matter of fact, I spent most of my life in the Tavern of the King's Arms, right up on Duke of Gloucester Street, right across from the Raleigh Tavern. As a matter of fact, there used to be about 15 taverns in Williamsburg. And I think goodness that the King's Arms, of course, would be a tavern that Mrs. Jane Vobe, my owner, who owned not only the tavern, but 13 other enslaved people. I was born a slave. I've always been controlled by the laws. And on this now Constitution Day, thank God, that the very fact of the laws itself has always been very important to me and important in my life. The law of Virginia that made me a slave was a law that was written some years ago in the year of our Lord 1670 in our first capital, Jamestown. It was in that capital, Jamestown, that the law was written by those politicians to say that any Negro, mulatto, Indian coming by land or sea from a non-Christian country will be a slave for the rest of your natural life. Condition set upon the mother. The condition of your mother is the condition of the child. So therefore, my mother, since she had been born a slave here also, when I was conceived in her womb, actually, the law of Virginia said I would be a slave when I was birthed. I didn't have anything to do with that law. As a matter of fact, I always like to say, if I had anything to do with that law, I would have made myself king, or maybe a chief of my own peoples, of my own peoples in Africa. But of course, the law again is very, very important to me. Now that I'm no longer a slave, thank God, I am now a free man here now in the United States in Virginia, with my church now, which I started in 1776, with just a handful of people out on a plantation called Green Springs. Green Springs was quite a good plantation that allowed illegal Baptists, even illegal Methodists and Presbyterians on the plantation. The owner of that plantation was named Mr. William Lee, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with the Lees of Virginia. Mr. Richard Henry Lee, Mr. Harry Lightfoot Lee. But I believe it's because of their so I think in the honor, in the respect of their relative, we allowed these Baptists and any other denomination that was of dissenting nature upon this plantation. We started in 1776, as I said, but we grew quickly during the war years. 1776 was also the time of the War of Independence. And many of those things that happened during the wartime. As a matter of fact, signing the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776 might have been one of the best things ever happened for dissenting preachers like myself. And definitely for my church, being a Baptist church, and not necessarily a legal church here in the society, it probably would have been a good thing that we did sign that paper. And now, of course, we will have to fight this war against, I always say, the greatest military power in the world. And because of that, I was able to make my church, I say grow my church into about 200 members by the year of 1781, the Battle of Yorktown. Just before the Battle of Yorktown was the Battle of Green Springs. And it was at Green Springs I had to move my now 200 member congregation to a place called Raccoon's Chase. And that would be right off the road to Jamestown. At the mouth of College Creek, that's Raccoon's Chase, right behind the College of Mary. We began to meet there on a pretty regular basis. After we, of course, won the war with the Battle of Yorktown and signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, we continued to grow. As a matter of fact, I always say that after 1781 and 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, and of course, Williamsburg sort of died as a city. Did not have the normal business or the business that I was used to seeing here before the war. But after the war, 1776, and after that win, the city started to kind of descend a bit. But I must say that my congregation, Baptists, would only grow. As a matter of fact, would grow larger to, I would say by the time of my free paper, because I am no longer a slave, I am a free man. And again, it would take another law to make me free. My owner, Mrs. Jane Vobe, she passed away up in a place called, outside of Richmond, near Petersburg on the James River. She purchased a tavern in 1784 after she sold the King's Arms Tavern and moved upon the James up there in a place called Osborne's Tavern. I followed, of course, her there, and her son, David Miller, was with us up in Osborne's on the James. I never had to miss church or a single day of church on a Sunday, because we had quite a few ferrymen that would ferry up and down the river, knew them very, very personally. In fact, I think I knew all the ferrymen upon the James River. And so I would get back and forth very easy to my congregation there at the Raccoon's Chase, and back and forth on Sunday. For Baptists, as you well know, we have church all day. From sunup to sundown on a Sunday is a Baptist sermon. And of course, my sermons would be 3 hours on Sunday morning, 3 hours on Sunday evening, and we have great times of singing and coming together as a congregation. And I would say the most important thing now, we've been blessed. We've been blessed by a family called the Coles. Matter of fact, it was one of the Cole family members that was riding in the chase that we were meeting, the Raccoon's Chase, on a Sunday, and heard us singing, now with a congregation of over 500 members. I don't know if you know, there's not many churches in America that have a congregation of 500 members. And so I had that number, and when Mr. Cole gave us that property on the corner of Nassau and Francis Street, that is when I moved the 500-member congregation to Nassau, on the corner of Nassau, northwest Nassau, south of Francis Street, right across from the public hospital. And there, I take it symbolically that the Northwest Territory, if you might have heard at one time, we had a region in our country here in North America called the Northwest Territory, and that is a place where slavery was outlawed. So I call my little church here, not so little, but my congregation that's meeting on Northwest Nassau, we found a way to have our own Northwest Territory in our church here, First Baptist Church. But I understand that I can go on because I'm a Baptist preacher. You must understand. I can talk a long time, but I'm really curious about your thinking on this great day of the Constitution. And of course, I take the Declaration of Independence and the Virginia Statutes of Religious Freedom and the Constitution I take as a very vital documents. And I would say that all three of those documents have helped us remain a congregation, now legal congregation, here now in the United States of America. So whatever questions that you have, I'll be glad to take them on. And so I'm passing on to the ones that's asking the question or
Thank you,
taking that
Reverend
in.
Pamphlet.
Yes.
It's such an honor to be with you today.
It's an honor to be with you.
Being such a mainstay here in the community. You have mentioned that your congregation is the First Baptist Church.
Yes.
With nearly 500 members of your congregation. Do you think that there's going to be a Second Baptist, Third Baptist, Fourth Baptist?
Well, if I have anything to do with it, it would not only be that, but I'm sure it'll be 6th, 7th, and 8th Baptists. I've already ordained at this point in 1798. I've already ordained about 4 other Black Baptist preachers that's now sitting with me in my pulpit. One is Israel Kemp and John Dipper and Joseph Meade and Jacob Bishop. He and I were very close. He had been called over to a place called Portsmouth, First Baptist Church of Portsmouth. Jacob Bishop is a Negro preacher, and he used to be owned by an Elijah Baker, also a white Baptist preacher. But he was called to an all-white church in Portsmouth, Virginia, to pastor them for a number of years, and for 2 years he did, and he's made his way back to my pulpit and for a bit of a respite before he's headed up to, I believe he said, somewhere in New York.
Well, thank you for that, sir. I hope that your church will be very long-lived for many generations to enjoy.
We pray
We've
that
had a few questions from your flock today, and it seems like the subject of the Constitution is on everyone's minds.
Yes.
And Tina has asked what life was like for dissenters between the time the Constitution was ratified and when the Bill of Rights was ratified.
Well, Tina, I want you to know that life for dissenters of any denomination other than, of course, the Church of England, possibly the Puritans in Massachusetts and the Congregationalists in Connecticut, life for the rest of us was horrible. And I mean, sometimes in some particular colonies, these dissenters, especially if they have not obtained the license, the rule of the state Church of England, the rule of the different colonies, especially 10 of the 13 colonies, you as a dissenter have to get that license. And as a matter of fact, This is my King James Bible that I was given in a Christmas box that I had some years ago with Mrs. Vobe. If you would take this King James Bible and just open it up, and not even preaching to that flock that might have gathered to hear you preach, you just broke the law. And then the sheriff or the constable could arrest you and have you taken to jail. If not, maybe even some punishments of a nature upon your body, because you might be, as most Baptists, very resistant of being arrested for preaching the word of the Son of God. Well, of course, it was very, very difficult before not only the Constitution, but before even the Declaration of Independence. I think my first, medicine for the soul of the dissenting preacher was the signing of the Declaration of Independence in July 4th, 1776. We saw an easing of persecutions in many of the colonies, especially Virginia, when we signed the Declaration of War against Great Britain. Thank God for that.
Thank you for that, sir. Denise has asked, or has made the comment, many announcements to the public were made via the church. How will what you say to your congregation about the Constitution differ from what is said at Bruton Parish, or will it differ?
Denise, what a question. I would love for you to be in my congregation, so I might have you ask that question so I can continue to try to teach my people, because we do try to give them as much as we know the truth. The Bible says this: ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And I really do believe deep in my heart that freedom, in order to be free, you just got to know truth and tell the truth and understand what truth is all about. I would have to give as much sometime. It sort of really bothers me, because Bruton Parish Church used to be the representation of the Church of England, headed by King George III in this case, and the Bishop of Canterbury, the Bishop of London. But Bruton Parish Church has now changed its denomination. It's no longer Anglican. It is now the Episcopal Church of America. And by God, they might have been a whole lot better, the Episcopals, than the Anglicans if they were here first. But so I have to give them a little credit of not being such an abusive denomination. So I believe that answers this question.
Thank you, Reverend. We want to remind all of your flock that's watching right now that you're more than happy to ask any questions that you might want of the good Reverend here, and we'll try and have him address them. But Reverend Gowan, you are a freed former slave.
Yes.
You are now a free man.
Amen.
Who is a Baptist preacher.
Yes.
And today, in thinking about the Constitution, do you think that the white men who drafted the Constitution had you or your congregation in mind when they spoke about religious freedoms?
I can't speak for all of the gentlemen that, of course, were in Constitution Hall, and of course, each of now state that ratified the Constitution. I would say not all of the gentlemen, I believe, would have had my church in mind, because my church is, of course, I was for a long time the only Negro preacher in America. I was the first Negro preacher that had been ordained to be a preacher of a denomination, in this case Baptist, in America. And most of my church, of that 500 member, most are enslaved. And so I wouldn't say necessarily, because we are very, very unique. I think we, for the longest time, as a denomination, as a church, and of course as a preacher, I don't think it was many others in America like my denomination, like my church. And I believe that the gentleman might have had other denominations, mainly probably white churches in mind,
But you see, I am what you would call an American now. I was American, and I always say I had become an American before America became America. Because many times in the King's Arms Tavern where I would be working, I would hear the speeches, I would hear the talks about independency. In fact, I heard that come out of the walls of the Raleigh Tavern when the 89 Burgesses marched into that tavern in that day, and you could hear almost in a unanimous voice of one, independency. And then I said, huzzah, because that's what I wanted, not only as an enslaved person, but as a pastor with a congregation now of over 500 members.
Thank you for that. And speaking of your congregation of 500, what is the makeup of your congregation? Is it primarily enslaved or free blacks, or are there white people there as well?
Well, I do have mainly enslaved people. Thank you for that question, too, because it needs to be a clarification, because I've heard people come through town sometimes. They ask me, well, Reverend, am I welcome to come to your church? This might be a Scotsman or Irishman. They might ask me this question. I said, well, of course you're welcome to come to the church. The church is not all black church. I have the majority of my congregation is enslaved. I do have free blacks. That's part of my congregation. I have Indians. Some of them that are not living on the reservations are part of my congregation. And I have Irishmen, I've got Scotsmen, not in the numbers of some other churches, and I would have to say, I don't know of any denomination or any church that have just one particular race in the church. All churches have what you would call mixed congregations. Even in Bruton Parish, when they were Anglican, you would go on a Sunday morning to walk in and see some of the enslaved people that are going to the Bruton Church along with their owners, sitting right in the same box, maybe in the back seat of that box of that owner, but they are sitting right among everyone else. No really special place. Someone asked me a question. They said, well, why are there, what's the balcony for in Bruton Parish Church? Well, I said, well, just what I believe, that balcony there in Bruton Parish Church is more for the fraternities. Yeah. I think the rector wanted to keep an eye on the fraternity boys because they can sometimes get a little wild.
William has asked, when you first started your congregation, did your members still have to pay tithes to the Church of England?
My members did not have to pay tithe again, most of my members would have been enslaved. They would not have been forced or made to have to pay the tithe. The free blacks definitely had to pay the tithe. And of course, the Irish, Scots, Indians that are part of my congregation, some of them were able to pay tithes. I found a very unique way of how to get the tithe paid by the enslaved, especially those that did not have ready money or maybe access to the marketplace to sell wares, so they could have some ready money. And my way of doing this is to have all of my congregation and all the people in my congregation, especially enslaved, to use their talents to pay their tithes. Meaning whatever skill, and I do have 500 members, very highly skilled tradesmen. Some are seamsters, some are cooks, some are carpenters, some are brick makers. I've got almost iron workers, blacksmiths, plenty here in my congregation. And so what I tell them, anytime there's a need in the church or a need in the community, you use your talent to help satisfy that need. Let me know. Let the deacons and trustees know. And that would credit you for your tithe. So I found a way, I believe. That's why I'm very, very, very concerned about Mr. Patrick Henry's assessment bill. He was trying to find means or ways of people taking care of the orphans and the widows and all. I said, I talked to Mr. Henry not too long ago. I said, well, I think I've got a way that I think we can help you out without having your assessment bill.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
We have another question in regard to the new Constitution. Tina has asked, what are your feelings about African Americans being deemed as 3/5 of a white person in the Constitution?
Well, that really does hit the spot in my soul, Tina. When I read that, I believe it's Article 1, Section 2, there in the Constitution that speaks of the 3/5 of a person, an enslaved person considered 3/5. It broke my heart when I saw it. First of all, I wonder how they even would come up with the 3/5. I heard it was even a compromise. Well, anyway, I don't think God looks at us as being 3/5 of a human being. In fact, I believe we all are human beings fully. We all created by God. That's why I did like the part in the Declaration says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, of course I say humankind, are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I love the word unalienable. I don't know when Mr. Jefferson, where he got that word from, but a perfect word, because it is very inclusive of all human beings upon the earth, because it says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable means, because it took me a long time to figure out what that word meant. Some people have come to even say it now, inalienable. I don't know what that means. But an alien cannot give you rights. It's only can be given you when it's endowed by your Creator, who is God, to have those rights. And I believe in the picture that I draw for my people in my congregation, that you are a soul ready to be placed in your mother's womb. And I believe God has all those rights kind of piled up on the side. And when he's ready to put you in your mother's womb, he put those rights in your soul. So you now have those rights birthed by your Creator. So there's no 3/5 of a person. No, we are all, in the eyes of God, we are his creation. Black, white, bond or free, Indian, doesn't matter who you are. I hate to get so excited about it.
I think you just preached at us a little bit, Reverend Gowan. Thinking a little bit about your own journey and your own story, which is quite remarkable, beginning your life as an enslaved person, now a freed, the first ordained Baptist minister in this country, with a congregation of over 500. Marquita, and I apologize if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but she wants to know, how did you feel when you gained your freedom, and what was the first thing you did?
Woo! Marquita, let me tell you. I'm sure you have gone through this kind of thinking too. Something you've wanted all your life. I mean, it could be something that seemed to be unattainable, out of your reach. But you become so faithful and believe so hard that you know you can obtain that certain thing. And that's exactly what my free paper meant to me when I was able to receive that paper in the court of York here in Virginia, 1793. My owner, Mrs Vobe, had passed away up in Osborne about 1786. But her son, David Miller, who had been, of course, given her estate to settle a lot of the debts, said to me that his mother had told him on her deathbed that she wanted me free. And David Miller was the one that actually took me to that courthouse in 1793, through our own agreement, by the way, and I received my free paper And I tell you, I believe I was on some kind of a cloud for about a week. I know I did dance the holy dance up and down the streets of Nassau. And in the church when we met, it just became a very exciting time for me because when you achieve something that seems like it's out of your reach, it really brings you some kind of joy, happiness. You're never going to be the same again. I'll put it that way. But I'm not satisfied. I want others to taste the same type. I call it honey that had been falling from the lips of many of those that have tasted freedom. I always desire to have that honey, but I want everyone else that's in bondage to taste of that honey too. And that's my mission in life, is to see the institution of slavery ended as soon as possible.
Amen to that,
Amen.
Reverend. Speaking about your freedom and the path that you went down, you've spoken a little bit about your former owner, Mrs. Vobe, and that her son carried out her final wishes. But did you and Mrs. Vobe ever discuss your freedom before her death?
Oh, yes, many times. You have to see and understand not all owners of enslaved people are the same. Sometimes we want to put everybody in a box and everybody has the same look and wears the same styles. And no. Every single household, every single owner of enslaved people in this country were different. And Mrs. Vobe was mightily different. She not only owned the Tavern of the King's Arm, one of the most frequent and some say the finest tavern in all Virginia. But she owned it outright as a businesswoman. So she was able to make her own decisions on many things. But when it came for the time for me to come to her to ask her for ordination by these Baptists, I didn't know what she was going to say because I had never known or heard of an enslaved person ever been ordained or becoming a pastor or preacher of a denominational church. I don't think, one existed before I got ordained. But she gave me the nod. Not only that, supported me through my venture with the church in 1776. She allowed me off every Sunday. Let me tell you, how important is that? Sundays are the most profitable time for taverns anywhere in the colonies, now states. But yet she would let me pastor my congregation in the time I needed to. So it's something about Mrs. Vobe that was different. And I would say mainly I attribute it to one big reason. She left the Church of England in the 1760s. And my belief is that she had frequented more with the Presbyterians. And the teaching from the pulpit of the Presbyterians and the teaching from the Church of England was wholly different. The Church of England sanctioned slavery, even said it was deemed of God. Presbyterians said, we're only equal in the eyes of God. All peoples are equal in the eyes of God. He has no respect of person. And so I think through the teachings of those pulpits, I think brought about a change in her. Yeah.
She most certainly was a special woman.
Amen.
Gwen has asked a question of, are the names of the members of your congregation recorded anywhere so that perhaps future generations could find them?
Oh, absolutely. I am honored to have a congregation with many of the descendants of their family members listed in the census. Censuses are taken quite frequently here. We got copies of the census, especially in the Williamsburg area, in this region of Virginia. We also have church record books, which we keep a list of the names. Bruton Parish Church did the same thing. I must say, even for free blacks that attended Bruton Parish Church and some of the enslaved, record books are quite valuable in keeping the names of people. Sometimes even in the Bible, people use it for their own personal use. If they have a Bible in their house, you find the names of a lot of the newborn babies and some of the elders that no longer with us. You see their names and their life stories in books, in record books.
That's wonderful. Going along the same line of recording, Brian has asked if you could talk a little bit about who built your church.
Oh, well, I have the pleasure, Brian, that in my congregation of over 500, at least 40 carpenters. And so when we got the property on Nassau Street, Mr. Cole gave us a tobacco bond on there. And we had just taken that tobacco bond with my carpenters and just redid the whole thing. And some say it's one of the most beautiful wooden structures they have ever seen there on Nassau. So I have no need, again, of having any needs in the church that cannot be met by some of the members of the church because of their skills.
Thank you, sir. How did your congregation survive the War of Independence? Kurt would like to know.
Oh, well, Kurt, let me tell you, I believe it was the divine providence of God. and also their own fortitude, because for 6 years, and especially until the Battle of Yorktown, it wasn't easy all the time to meet. You never know where the British were, being somewhere near the waterway, especially once we had to move to Raccoon's Chase upon the creek. You never know when a ship or some sailors of the ship could come into where you are, especially when we were meeting as a congregation, and just take away. They call it impress people in their navy. And so we have to be very careful. And we always have our ways of communicating and keep each other informed to let them know if danger might be around. I know when Cornwallis occupied Williamsburg, June 1781, when the General Cornwallis marched the British Army of the South from South Carolina to Williamsburg, I just thought it was over for us. I knew, first of all, I kind of saw a noose swinging by my face, because Cornwallis probably would not have looked at my congregation as 200 Baptists. I think he would have thought it was like 200 rebels. And I would have been leading that mob. And so even as a Baptist preacher, I thought I might have been hanged. And many of us dissenters had the same kind of thought in their minds. But thank God September came. And of course, marched in the Continental Army, General George Washington, General Lafayette, and General Rochambeau, 10,000 Continental, 10,000 French soldiers. And thank God they defeated those redcoats down there in Yorktown, so we didn't have to worry about that no more.
That's right, sir. Unfortunately, our time is winding down with you, and we have time for one last question. You spoke previously about that rights provide security and protection, and that we should protect these rights. You've also mentioned that the spoils of winning the War of Independence are the ideals of liberty, freedom, equality, and justice.
Yes.
Do you think that these ideals are going to be shared with all Americans, and does this document, the Constitution, ensure that?
Time is not on my side to really talk to you like I want to talk to you, because those rights that we secured as a country, now in the United States of America, liberty, freedom, equality, and justice. As Mr. Jefferson had wrote in the Declaration, those unalienable rights that we secured through the win of that war, they are so precious. It took us a lot of battle, a lot of blood, a lot of soldiers dying upon the battlefield, especially the Continentals. And many of those that wanted to fight for freedom and independency to secure those rights. Now, not everybody in the world have rights like we have. And I always say that we have to not only protect it, we have sort of the sentry on duty, standing guard to protect the rights. But the sentry on duty is you, me, and everybody else that call themselves Americans. We're all sentries. And we have to protect those rights. Because as we had secured the rights through a lot of bloodshed in that war in 1776, we can lose those same rights in the twinkling of an eye. There are countries, there are people that are very jealous of our rights, and they will try their best, if they could, to take it away from us. So I'm going to charge you, and I'm giving you a charge, that you tell your children and your children's 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 children that there is their duty, once they become the adults that we are, to make sure that they continue to protect those rights. Because if not, we're no longer going to be the United States of America. We'll be of some other ilk. And I don't think you want to see that. We like to thank our donors for contributing to the foundation. We could not do this if it wasn't for you. And I thank you very much, and we thank you all for your contribution and watching this talk today.